I knew things were circling the drain the second I saw Chad Jr.'s smug little face on the meeting invite. Subject line? Quick sync. No agenda. No context. Just a calendar ambush from a man who once tried to reboot a server by turning off the lights in the data center. I walked in, still wearing my ID badge, still logged into 3 live shells, and sat down across from him while he picked his teeth with a paperclip like we were old friends at a barbecue. "Thanks for coming on such short notice," he said, grinning like he just discovered fire. "Look, I'll cut to the chase. We're making some changes. Leaner, meaner, more agile. And frankly," he leaned in like he was about to tell me a state secret, "no one is irreplaceable in my dad's company." That's when I glanced at the clock. 11:56 a.m. My master credentials, single-point access to $28 million worth of infrastructure, were tied to my active employment status. And that status? Set to terminate at 12 o'clock sharp, per HR's own damn automation system. In 4 minutes, the lights were going out. Not literally. Worse, he kept rambling about efficiency and modernizing the org, tossing around buzzwords like a toddler with a chainsaw, completely unaware that the only person keeping the ship from sinking was the woman he just fired. I didn't interrupt, didn't flinch, just watched the digital clock behind him tick down like it was New Year's Eve in hell. And hey, if you're listening and you haven't subscribed yet, take 2 seconds and hit that button. Like the video if your boss has ever been dumber than a bag of hair. Keeps us going, and trust me, this ride's just getting started. Back in the office, I'd warned them a dozen times. We need redundancy. We need credential distribution. We need disaster recovery protocols that don't hinge on me remembering to eat lunch. But every time I opened my mouth, Chad Jr. or one of his overpaid frat brothers would slap a sticky note on my suggestions. Later, budget pending. Just have Tiffany in marketing copy you on her password list. I wish I was kidding. So now here he was, explaining to me how IT should be plug and play, like I was a damn USB stick. I looked down at my hands, steady, calm, cold. Every part of me wanted to scream, to flip the conference table, to print out a list of the 7,400 client records they'd lose by sundown and staple it to his forehead. But I didn't, because unlike Chad, I knew exactly what was coming. When he finally stopped patting himself on the back long enough to say, "Any questions?" I just smiled. It wasn't even a big smile, just the kind of tired half smirk you give someone seconds before they step on a rake. "Nope," I said, standing up slowly, crystal clear. He leaned back, clearly pleased with himself, and said, "Don't take it personal." I didn't reply, just walked out of that room like a ghost clocking out one final time. Because the funny thing about servers is they're not emotional. They don't get mad. They don't need revenge. But they do exactly what they're told. And they were about to follow their final order to the letter. Deny access to every single human on the system without my key, including Chad.H. sent Brandy. Of course they did. She showed up like a stressed-out house cat in heels, clutching a manila envelope like it might detonate. "Just need your badge and, your key card?" she mumbled, barely making eye contact. I nodded and reached for the drawer under my desk. Slow, deliberate. The whole office was quiet, like someone died. In a way, someone had. Just not me. The silence was thick as molasses. I could hear the vents humming, the soft ping of error alerts starting to trickle in from the monitoring dashboard still open on my second screen. I didn't close it. Let the next poor soul figure out why the logs were already throwing kernel panic flags like confetti. I packed slowly, coffee mug first. The one with the root access is sexy decal. Then my notebook, the one with the red sticker labeled, "Do not lose." I watched Brandy glance at it like it was radioactive. She didn't ask. Smart girl. Then came the hard drives. External. Encrypted. Nothing company-owned, just mine. Personal backups. Code snippets. A few scripts they refused to implement because corporate policy didn't support command line automation. Idiots. I could feel her watching me like I might suddenly go postal, but I didn't give her the satisfaction. No tears. No speeches. Just controlled detachment. Like I was wrapping up after a shift at a morgue. except the corpse was still twitching in the next room, oblivious to the blood loss. On the wall behind my desk was a printout, my old risk assessment chart, color-coded, highlighted, sent to everyone with a title and an opinion 18 months ago. It warned, in large bold font, Master Admin, single point of failure. I remember the exact phrase I used. If I get hit by a bus, you better hope the ghost of Alan Turing takes over, because no one else has the keys. Chad Jr. laughed during that meeting, said we'd just reset the password. There was no password reset. Not unless you could SSH into the root node behind the firewall that only authenticated my biometric keychain. Something they approved because it was efficient. Brandy fidgeted. IT says you're still logged into? Like, everything? I turned slowly. Yeah, I'll log out before I hand over the badge. She nodded too fast. Okay, no rush. Just protocol. She didn't know. None of them did. Not really. They thought access was like a light switch. Flip it off, flip it on. But access is a trust agreement. Systems don't trust faces or last names or job titles. They trust the credentials they're told to trust. And every single one of them was told to trust me. I zipped the bag, stood up, handed over the badge like I was returning a library book. The monitors behind me blinked a warning. AUDH token expired. I didn't look back. Just walked out slow, my boots echoing on the tile like a countdown clock no one could hear but me. 3 floors down, the lobby lights flickered for a second. Maybe coincidence. Maybe not. I smiled. Just a little dot. I was halfway through the parking lot when the first rail warning hit the network like a mosquito on a windshield. Annoying, easy to dismiss, but messy if you actually looked close. Brandy probably saw it first, blinking in the corner of her screen. Automated backup failure. Node _07, authentication error. Harmless, right? Just a little hiccup in the matrix. Then came the second. Process queue halted, scheduled job rejected by master controller. That one probably made someone blink. By the time I hit the driver's seat of my truck, there were at least a dozen. Errors stacking like bricks on a tomb. Cluster nodes not syncing. Shadow copies refusing to spin up. A trickle of internal APIs throwing 403s, denied access, no fallback route. Inside, Chad Jr. was probably still riding the high of his little power play, chest puffed out like a rooster on Red Bull. He'd probably just cracked open a LaCroix, turned to the IT team, and said something brilliant like, "Glitches happen. Of course they do, Chad. Especially when the entire infrastructure's heartbeat is tied to a single credential chain that just got revoked like a bad credit card." Glitches, in this case, were the system's polite way of warning, "We're about to enter hell mode." The receptionist barely looked up as I strolled past the glass doors, sunglasses on, bags slung over one shoulder. I gave her a nod. She gave me that awkward smile people save for divorces and funerals. The sun hit me like a spotlight the second I stepped outside. That weird kind of warmth that feels like a curtain dropping. It was done. But for them, it was just beginning. Inside the building, inboxes were starting to hum. Failed sync detected. Client disconnect on port 440. Access denied. Unknown user. Like little tech gremlins whispering, "You shouldn't have done that." And still, I bet they hadn't connected the dots. Not yet. To them, I was just the system admin with the weird coffee mug and too many post-it notes. They never understood that the reason the lights stayed on wasn't automation. It was discipline. Scripts. Firewalls. Failover routines I built. Not because I was told to, because I knew one day someone like Chad would walk in and break everything with a sentence. I pulled onto the freeway, cracked the window, and let the wind roll in. My phone buzzed just once. A Slack notification still active on my personal device. "Hey, can you check node _02? We're getting some weird flags." I turned the screen face down on the passenger seat and kept driving. They were still calling it weird. In 10 minutes, they'd be calling it unexplainable. In 20, they'd be calling it critical. And by the end of the day, they'd be calling it my fault. Which was fine, because I wouldn't be answering. IT started with a blinking cursor and a little red box. Around 12:17 p.m., one of the junior sysadmins, A kid named Ethan who still called me ma'am, like we were in a 1940s war movie. Probably sat up a little straighter when his screen lit up with access denied, admin token invalid. He tried again and again. Same result. Then his terminal froze. He rebooted. Nothing. At 12:19, the second floor's mainframe interface dropped connection to the load balancer. By 12:21, Jenkins failed to deploy anything queued after 11:58. Automated patching stopped mid-process. Someone tried to force a rollback. They couldn't. The rollback permissions were tied to my credential tree. Not a single fallback user configured. Not one. By 12:24, the entire server farm locked up like it had been flash frozen. Thousands of simultaneous processes kicked back error codes. Authentication loop failures. Permissions collapse. Core dependencies scrambling to find a valid user in a system that had just been orphaned. From where I sat, driver's seat of my truck, parked behind the Taco Bell across the street, I could see the top corner of the building through the cracked windshield. I imagined the chaos blooming like a time-lapse of mold. Phones ringing, screens flickering, developers swearing. Chad Jr. probably pacing with that same confused expression he used when I tried to explain what SSH tunneling was. I popped open a lukewarm Red Bull from the console and took a slow sip. No music, no news, just the quiet sound of air conditioning and karma. Then came the first real scream. Not literal, just that corporate-style yelp that echoes when someone finally gets it. Probably the IT director, pale-faced and sweating, announcing, "We've lost admin control. We're locked out." That was the moment they realized this wasn't some quirky Friday bug. This was structural, foundational, like realizing you built your entire house on one screw and it just rolled under the fridge. By 12:30, client calls had begun. I wasn't there to hear them, but I could imagine. "We can't access our cloud instance. Our data sync has stopped. Why is your DNS record throwing 500 threes? And my personal favorite, is this a breach?" Spoiler alert, no breach, no hackers, just a system doing what it was designed to do, respect the authority of the one person it trusted. Me. Chad might have still been bluffing. "Just reboot the servers," I pictured him saying. "Get the backup admin in here." Except there was no backup admin. The title existed. The role did not. Every escalation path led to a dead end because I was the one who designed the damn path. I was the map. I watched the building from the Taco Bell parking lot like it was a slow-motion implosion. I could almost hear the gears grinding to a halt. No smoke, no alarms. Just the eerie stillness of a $28 million machine realizing it doesn't know who to obey anymore. Quiet satisfaction doesn't begin to describe it. I'd warned them, documented it, emailed it, presented it in 2 all-hands meetings. They thought I was being dramatic, thought it was fear-mongering, thought redundancy was expensive and legacy protocols were overkill. But now they were paying the invoice for arrogance, and the interest rate was compounding by the second. I glanced at my watch, smiled, and whispered to no one in particular. Right on schedule. The boardroom went full Chernobyl at exactly 12:43 p.m. The CEO, Leonard F. Carrington III, a man who once told me servers were like microwave ovens for data, burst into the glass-walled conference room like he was kicking in the gates of Normandy. His Rolex hit the table first, followed by his phone, which was already vibrating like a dying cricket from a dozen missed calls. "Someone tell me what the hell is going on," he barked. Chad Jr. was already mid-spiral, pacing like a coked-up pelican. "It's just a reset issue," he said, for maybe the 4th time. "Probably a DNS sync conflict or something dumb. These things happen." He tossed the phrase out like glitter at a funeral, hoping someone would catch it and run. The IT director, a man named Travis who once asked me if Linux was like a Chrome extension, was white as drywall. He didn't sit, didn't speak, just stood there blinking behind his glasses until the CFO finally growled, "Travis, talk, now." And then the sentence that officially detonated the day. There's no secondary admin registered." Silence. Not the kind that gives you a moment to think. The kind that hangs. like smoke after an explosion. The CTO coughed. What do you mean no secondary? Travis swallowed. I mean, the root credentials were assigned to her. He said it like I was Voldemort. She was the primary sysadmin, the only one with shell access to core systems. Leonard slowly turned toward his son like a man realizing he's raised a golden retriever with a podcast. You mean to tell me you fired the only person who could access the infrastructure? Chad blinked. It's not my fault she didn't document. She did. The legal rep cut in, holding up a dusty folder. She sent 5 memos in the past year about credential consolidation and failure risk. One of them's labeled, "For when you inevitably screw this up." She flipped it open, deadpan. Time-stamped. Read receipt confirmed by you. Chad stared at the ceiling like he was looking for a reset button on the universe. By 1 p.m., the floor outside the boardroom looked like a war room. Half the engineers were on speakerphones trying to reach vendors, insurance, the data center. The other half were Googling things like, how to rebuild RAID from memory, and can you reverse engineer root access using coffee and regret? In the corner, the finance team was quietly calculating how many millions were hemorrhaging every hour without transaction processing. The last figure I saw on a Slack screen before my access was fully revoked was $4.2 million. Lost billing, stalled pipelines, breached SLA penalties. From my new seat, corner booth, cheap diner, crinkled menu, I watched it all unfold on my second phone. Not illegal, by the way. Just a leftover dev build hooked to the internal status feed I'd never been asked to decommission. They never remembered the tools they told me to build. But I remembered every single one. The CEO's voice echoed out of a video clip someone leaked already. Can we offer her a consulting contract? Like today? Someone else replied. You fired her an hour ago. I stirred my coffee. No cream, no sugar. Just bitter, black, and hot enough to scald. Chaos in the boardroom. Calm in my bones. They were past the point of return. This wasn't just a mistake. This was a monument to negligence, and it was standing tall. By 2:15 p.m., the outage had gone viral, at least in the B2B circles that actually mattered. The kind of circles where a single dropped packet meant a breach of contract and a missed compliance ping meant federal teeth on your neck. External clients started noticing more than just slow dashboards. Whole platforms went dark. Scheduled data pulls failed without fallback. Secure messaging queues were bouncing like bad checks. It didn't help that half of our clients were in logistics, finance, and defense contracting, industries that treat uptime like oxygen. I'd built the infrastructure to handle it all quietly, efficiently, the backbone of their operations. And now the spine was gone and they were flopping like fish in a frying pan. One of our biggest partners, multi-year deal, 6-figure SLA clause, posted publicly. We are experiencing critical outages tied to our infrastructure provider. We've requested immediate explanation and resolution. Translation: someone's about to get sued. By 2:27, I heard from an old colleague. Still inside the company, still pretending to be on lunch. They sent me a screenshot of an email from one of our largest institutional investors. Subject line: urgent. Explain this disruption. Body was one line. Is it true your entire infrastructure was tied to a single employee's access? No one replied. The dominoes didn't just fall, they cartwheeled. Compliance triggers started firing. The internal audit platform, which ran hourly pings to verify uptime across regulated environments, began sending alerts directly to the federal compliance liaison on file. They'd always asked, is there a redundancy layer? And Chad always waved his hand and said, of course. Turns out, his redundancy was the assumption that I'd never leave. Meanwhile, across the street from their dumpster fire, I was home. Not home and sobbing into a wine bottle like some tragic ex-employee. Home. Clean house. Quiet playlist. Dog snoring under the kitchen table. I was barefoot in yoga pants, pouring a generous splash of bourbon into a chipped mug that said, System admins make it happen. The phone buzzed. Then again. Then again. Slack. Texts. Calls. For LinkedIn recruiters. A voicemail from a Fortune 500 CIO I'd never met. We're aware of the situation. If you're open to consulting, let's talk. Triple rate. No politics. Another buzz, this time from my personal email. An automated forwarder I'd forgotten about. It relayed internal insurance communication flagged urgent. Subject: Cyber Policy Clause 14C, single point admin violation. I remembered that clause. Helped write the damn compliance framework when they renewed the policy 2 years ago. It specifically voided cyber liability coverage if infrastructure relied on a non-distributed access chain. Which it did. Because every time I brought it up, Chad said, just click accept. We'll fix it later. And now later had shown up with a shotgun and a legal team. I sat on the couch, swirling the bourbon in the mug, watching my phone light up with increasingly frantic notifications. One from the CEO's assistant, subject line: Leonard says please call. I didn't. I leaned back, let the jazz playlist roll, tapped once to archive the message, then again to block the number. They weren't calling me for help. They were calling to ask if I could unburn a building that hadn't just caught fire. It had melted into its own foundation. And I was finally warm for the first time in months. At 3:04 p.m. The call came through. Unknown number, no caller ID. But I knew that ringtone, custom set for the internal extension I'd assigned to Leonard Carrington III, back when he still called me kiddo and trusted me with the company's digital spine. I let it ring twice, not 3, just enough to make him sweat. Hello. There was a pause on the other end. Breathing, shallow, ragged. Then, it's Leonard. No Miss Keller. No small talk. Just that voice. Once polished and commanding. Now hoarse like it had been screaming into voids all afternoon. We need you back. Immediately. I didn't say anything. Just let the silence stretch. I could hear the tension crackling through the phone like an old AM radio caught in a storm. I know, he added quickly. I know how this looks. I'm aware we acted hastily. But we're bleeding out here. Half our Tier 1 clients are offline. The board's panicking. Legal just informed me we violated our federal compliance parameters. And the insurance. His voice cracked. We have no coverage. No coverage. Still, I said nothing. Just traced the rim of my bourbon mug with one finger. Chad was misinformed, he continued, fumbling for words like they owed him something. He didn't understand the complexity, the importance of your role. Another long breath. I'll bring you back in as a consultant. Full authority. Whatever rate you want. We'll make it right. Just, please. My TV was still paused on the last frame of the thing. Kurt Russell in the snow, waiting for a monster that might already be dead. Felt appropriate. Why, I said slowly, would I return to a place that said I was dispensable? There was no answer. Not at first. Just that kind of hollow executive silence that follows 1,000 bad decisions catching up all at once. I was the one who kept the lights on. I was the one who built your failover paths, your encryption schema, your infrastructure triage scripts. Scripts your son deleted because they cluttered the drive. I asked for a team. You gave me contractors. I asked for a backup admin. You gave me a TikTok intern who thought root was a salad. Leonard exhaled, slow and pained. I know. Believe me. I know now. My tone didn't change. It didn't need to. You fired the firewall. Silence again. He didn't defend himself. Couldn't. There was no policy excuse, no HR memo, no budget realignment that could undo what was happening. Then he said it. Tell me what you want. I didn't answer. Not yet. Because this wasn't just about money. It wasn't even about vindication. It was about being underestimated so profoundly by a man who thought family legacy made him immune to consequences. And now couldn't log into his own server farm without tripping an authentication lockout I wrote during my lunch breaks. I hung up. Didn't yell. Didn't gloat. Just set the phone down, refilled my drink, and looked out the window as the October wind picked up. I didn't need to rush. The worse it got, the clearer my value became. And by nightfall, they'd be willing to offer more than just a blank check. They'd offer control. And this time, I wouldn't give it back. By 5 p.m. The lights weren't just flickering, they were gone. Every server, every endpoint, every automated task across the $28 million infrastructure had choked and died. Internal ops were frozen. External client portals were spinning timeout wheels. Even the backup generators that powered the data integrity mirror were bricked, because those too required validation from a root certificate that no longer existed in the living system. They'd built a digital skyscraper on a single bolt, then fired the engineer holding the wrench. Revenue loss had passed $11.6 million by late afternoon. Based on internal projections someone leaked on Reddit under a burner account named Root Cause Rick. Another $3.2 million flagged as unrecoverable contract penalties due to missed SLA thresholds. The legal team started their email subject lines with "confidential," "do not forward," and ended them with, "We strongly recommend immediate containment language for the board meeting." Leonard Carrington III stood in front of a hastily assembled press conference around 5:18 p.m., bags under his eyes and sweat bleeding through his collar. Cameras clicked. His jaw clenched. "We believe we've been the target of an internal technical sabotage," he said, reading from a crumpled piece of paper. "We're investigating all potential sources and are actively working with federal cybercrime units to address this breach." But behind the conference room glass, legal was already pulling receipts, meeting minutes, email threads, risk assessments marked "High," memos with my name on the CC line. A flagged report from 14 months ago titled "Critical Dependency on Single Credential Infrastructure, Immediate Risk," with a follow-up note. "This will cost us more later." Leonard's son sat 2 seats down, no longer pacing or posturing, just staring, pale, still, eyes darting between lawyers and directors like a man waiting to be shot. When the CFO asked, "You were aware she was the sole admin, correct?" He didn't even answer, just nodded. "Once, I got screenshots from an inside source. One showed Chad gripping his knees under the table. Another showed a whiteboard someone wrote on in red expo marker. Find her. Fix this." Too late. By 6:07 p.m., the news broke on TechCrunch. Carrington Corp crippled by system lockout. Insider fired hours before collapse. The headline made it sound dramatic, but it barely scratched the surface. Beneath it, analysts were already weighing the company's ability to recover. Investors were pulling out. Internal Slack screenshots leaked. Engineers throwing blame like dodgeballs. Directors resigning from committees in real time. And one poor HR assistant asking, "Does anyone know her home address?" Meanwhile, my inbox was turning into a buffet. 10 new offers. All consulting. 3 from direct competitors. 1 from an AI firm in Austin offering relocation, 6 figures, and full autonomy. Another came from a government contractor asking if I'd ever worked on encryption frameworks for secure communication channels. They'd appreciate a conversation. I didn't reply. Not yet. I took a walk instead. Sunset bleeding over the neighborhood rooftops like a soft detonation. My phone buzzed again. Another offer. I silenced it. It wasn't about the money. It was about the choice. They called me invisible, disposable. A quiet IT girl who was good with wires and bad with PR. Now I was the ghost in their machine, and they were praying I'd come back to haunt them gently. Spoiler. I wouldn't. ChatGPT skazal. It was raining when I signed the contract. That soft, sticky Midwest rain that makes the world feel like it's dissolving just a little around the edges. I was in a booth at Molly's Cafe, the one with the uneven tables and the terrible jazz playlist. Same spot I used to grade vendor audits during lunch breaks. Only this time I wasn't auditing anyone. I was writing my own terms. The woman across from me smiled as she slid the paperwork over. Director of infrastructure at a firm 10 times more stable than the circus I just escaped. She'd read the TechCrunch article, of course. So had half the industry. "We won't make the same mistake," she said gently. "You'll have full control. Triple your old rate. No micromanaging. We listen." I believed her. Mostly. But just in case, I'd buried 3 kill switches in the first draft of the architecture plan. No one would ever catch them, but they'd remind me I still held the pen. I signed without flair. No selfie. No champagne. Just black ink and steady hands. My old company, last I heard, They were spiraling. Clients bleeding out by the hour. The board floated an emergency asset sale to an overseas firm. Rumors said they were trying to spin it as strategic restructuring. But insiders knew it was a drowning gasp. The CEO hadn't shown his face in days. And Chad? Gone. Quietly removed from his post with a 3-line memo. Effective immediately, Charles Carrington Jr. will no longer serve in an operational capacity. No ceremony, no farewell, not even a LinkedIn post, just a deleted badge and a locked office. My phone buzzed again. No caller ID. I didn't answer. The voicemail transcribed itself automatically. Please, we're prepared to offer equity. The board is willing to discuss a complete reset. Just call me back. Please. I tapped delete, then blocked the number. Outside, the rain was easing up. The sky over the parking lot cracked open into a strip of dull gold, and I felt the strangest thing. Not relief, not triumph, just done. No more justifying myself to people who only saw wires and tickets instead of backbone. No more being told to be quiet while billion-dollar systems balanced on my shoulders. I gathered the contract, slid it into my bag, and left a few bills on the table. No tip jar for revenge, but I left extra anyway. The kid behind the counter reminded me of Ethan, the junior admin who'd called me, ma'am. Bet he'd be fine. Bet he already learned more in the last 24 hours than Chad did in 2 years. I stepped into the evening air, crisp and clean, and turned my phone off for the night. Final thought? They said no one was irreplaceable. Maybe they were right. The company isn't. But me? Turns out I was the system.